The UN says there's still time to save Ethiopia's starving millions. Drought has already taken the cattle, another lifeline extinguished. Mass defiance in Miami of the deadline to hand over little Elian. And eyewitnesses tell at last what they saw when 2 Leeds fans were murdered. Good evening. The UN has given its first assessment of the drought emergency in Ethiopia. The head of its World Food Programme says there's still time to save the millions who face starvation. Ethiopia's Prime Minister said he's confident that outside aid will avert famine and defended making war against neighbouring Eritrea while his people starved. So far, the aid effort has concentrated on the southeast of Ethiopia, but there are growing concerns about other parts of the country. Jeremy Cook reports from near the town of Yabelo in the country's southwest.
The cycle of life has been broken. The cattle are dying in their hundreds. 3 years of drought mean this land cannot sustain the stock on which human life depends. For the tribespeople of the Borena, these are desperate times. The cattle are their prime source of food and milk. The risk of famine is self-evident. Dabo Dido has 6 children. She's struggling to feed her baby son. We had milk for the children, but without our cattle it's gone, she told me. We gave him tea, but now we have no money for tea. We have nothing for the children. Even the animals still alive are practically useless. The villagers are trying to save some with hay provided by the Ethiopian government, but it's a losing battle. In desperation, the Borena are slaughtering cows even as the animals starve. It's a last resort. After this, the people will have nothing. The village chief, Buru Didad, used to have 120 cattle. Now there are just 10 left. He told me life is becoming impossible, worse than the Great Famine of 1984. No one can remember a time when things were this bad. They're not starving here yet, but while the world concentrates on the suffering in southeast Ethiopia, there is a potential catastrophe here too. Bute Galma is blind. All of his 10 cattle are dead. He doesn't know how to feed his 4 children. 10-year-old Garbich is already suffering from severe malnutrition. The first international aid workers are just arriving here. Already they know that some 500,000 people in the region need help now.
The carcasses we are seeing on the ground today could change very quickly into human carcasses in the near future. And an international response is demanded and is needed immediately.
The fact that so much of their stock is perished is a catastrophe for the people here. They are totally dependent on their cattle. All of this, though, means that they must now rely on international aid for their very survival. That aid is just beginning to arrive. These women have walked 18 miles from their village for rations of maize donated by the European Union. It's not much, but it will buy some time. Sporadic rains have finally arrived in southwest Ethiopia, bringing some relief to this parched land. But it's too late. There is no natural solution to end this country's agony. That will take human intervention on a massive scale. Jeremy Cook, BBC News, Borena, Ethiopia.
The UN's special envoy to Ethiopia called on the country's prime minister to speed up the supply of aid. But the Ethiopian government refuses to use the ports of neighbouring Eritrea, with which it's been at war since 1998, to bring in food. America criticised Ethiopia today for being focused on a needless war, rather than concentrating on dealing with drought and starvation. Orla Gearin reports on the battle to persuade Ethiopia's politicians that they should do more for the hungry.
He is starving while his government fights a war. As children waste away, Ethiopia is battling Eritrea over its border. The images we have filmed here are shocking. This young boy is left to die. His mother powerless to save her child. But Ethiopia insisted today it has every right to keep on fighting, no matter how many die of hunger.
In our view, you do as much as you can to save lives and at the same time protect your sovereignty. We do not believe protecting one's sovereignty is a luxury for the rich.
Ethiopia is not rich and war doesn't come cheap. The border dispute with Eritrea is costing a fortune. Over £600,000 a day, Western sources claim, a lot of cash while millions face starvation. But tonight the UN told us that people must give whatever the rights and wrongs.
In the humanitarian community, we do not have the luxury of making judgments about whether or not we agree with what the government is doing, or even whether we like what the government is doing. If we did, and we said we don't like what the government is doing, and therefore we're not sending aid, that would mean that millions of innocent children all over the world would die.
There is already tremendous suffering here, and the scenes that we're broadcasting are very distressing. What do you want the viewers to the 9 o'clock news to do? What do you want them to ask the government to do?
It's critical for every person to know that the situation is tragic, but that we can contain this, and that with aid, with additional aid, additional food, additional cash resources to purchase food, water, medicines, and other goods, that many millions of people in Ethiopia can avoid this terrible situation that unfortunately many people have faced already.
Of course, Ethiopia could spend less on war and more on aid, but that's not likely to happen. In the end, it comes down to this. Without major foreign help, millions here could starve. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Relatives of the 6-year-old Cuban boy, Elian Gonzalez, defied a deadline this evening to hand him over to the American authorities. The Attorney General, Janet Reno, had ordered that he should be flown to Washington to be reunited with his father. But within the past hour, the American government agreed to wait while the courts heard another appeal.
Thousands of Cuban Americans on the streets of Miami, a show of solidarity with a 6-year-old boy. Elian Gonzalez is staying here in Little Havana, his relatives refusing to hand him over to the US government for a reunion with his father. Papa. Elian here addressing his father, Papa, in a bizarre video released by the Miami family. I'm telling you, he says, I don't want to go to Cuba. You can stay here if you want to, but I don't want to go back to Cuba. Loud cheers as Elian and his relatives returned home from a meeting with the US Attorney General last night. She demanded the handover of the boy by this afternoon. They ignored her, and now the government has a big problem.
I am prepared to enforce the law, but I want to be clear that if we are compelled to enforce our order, we intend to do so in a reasonable, measured way.
Juan Miguel Gonzalez, Elian's father, staying with his second wife and baby at the home of a Cuban diplomat in Washington. Soon after the deadline for getting his son back passed, the Miami relatives won a court injunction, and that means more delay. Cuban-American friends and supporters of the Miami family, including pop star Gloria Estefan, formed a symbolic chain around Elian's home. They say the father must come to Miami if he wants his son.
We stand together as a Cuban-American community and offer the father sanctuary as well. He will be safe in Miami. He will be safe anywhere coming to get this child, because we understand that he is also a victim here.
As long as there's a threat of Elian being returned to his father and taken to Fidel Castro's Cuba, the protests and the prayers will continue. And still, it's hard to see how this standoff can be resolved without an ugly confrontation. It looks as though the one outcome US officials wanted to avoid is about to happen. Elian will have to be forcibly removed from a family and a community determined to keep him here. Stephen Sacker, BBC News, Miami.
Here, an all-party committee of MPs has largely exonerated the Trade Secretary Stephen Byers for his role in the Rover crisis. The committee's report said Mr. Byers could not have predicted BMW's plans to break up Rover, but he could have done more to safeguard the future of the Longbridge plant.
As production stopped at Longbridge today for the Easter break, workers were scarcely in holiday mood. After BMW's breakup of the Rover Group, they don't know what the future will hold. They fear it won't be much.
What we come back to, just do not know. Just go wait to see.
I've got a mortgage, I've got a young child, like many people in there. Obviously we're all worried to death, aren't we?
For Trade Secretary Stephen Byers, though, there was some relief. A report into the Rover affair by an all-party group of MPs said it was hard to see how he could have anticipated what happened. Mincing no words, the MPs say that BMW should be criticised over the sudden way it disposed of Rover, on grounds of incompetence and excessive secrecy. And they criticise the government's intelligence gathering, saying it could and should have done more to pick up the early warning signs of BMW's waning commitment to Longbridge. The Tories insisted Mr. Byers was responsible for his department's failings.
Clearly there were serious communication problems within the DTI for which he is personally responsible, whereby important signals and information were not passed at the appropriate time so that proper decisions and judgments could be made.
But the Select Committee effectively cleared him of poor anticipation and of claims that he doctored documents to cover his tracks.
I don't think he is necessarily enhanced by it, but he has the opportunity now to carry out a number of things as far as repairing the damage to Longbridge and to the people there. And I think that's what we should really be looking at now. I think that there is an opportunity now for the DTI to give leadership in rescue projects and in the attraction of new investment to the area.
But it's still a damaged Trade Secretary who'll visit Longbridge this weekend, and how he copes will be crucial. Downing Street insists the report has vindicated Mr. Byers, but colleagues still believe the Rover affair has raised questions about his quality. Robin Oakley, BBC News, at the Department of Trade and Industry.
The High Court in Zimbabwe has ordered the government to obey an earlier court order to end the forced occupations of white-owned farms. The judge rejected the police claim that they didn't have the resources to remove thousands of squatters. Despite the order, the invasions continue. The 9 o'clock news special correspondent Ben Brown has been back to the farm he was on yesterday when it was violently attacked.
Land for the people is the battle cry as President Mugabe's supporters take over yet another white farm. The weapons on display today were especially menacing, and so too were the sentiments. Forward with the armed struggle, shouts this man. The crisis here is becoming increasingly violent. Zimbabwe has dark and dangerous days ahead. Liz Retzlaff knows exactly how dangerous. For the second time in 48 hours, militants loyal to Mr. Mugabe have attacked her farm. They even tried to set fire to her house. But workers on the farm helped drive off the invaders.
It's a very frightening situation, but I can't really think too straight at the moment, but our people have been incredibly loyal and we've got to give them that moral support by staying here.
Her farm workers are fighting back against the militants. They know their livelihoods could be at risk if they don't, if the land on which they're employed is simply grabbed by extremists. This conflict is not just black against white, it's black against black as well. So today, when the militants attacked, farm workers chased them away through fields of maize. These men have had enough of Zimbabwe's land invasions, and worryingly for President Mugabe, they've had enough of him as well. In the Goromonzi area east of Harare, they've set up a roadblock to stop any more white farms being attacked. But some farm labourers have already paid a terrifying price for their bravery and for just working with whites. These labourers were beaten up on Mike Mason's farm, where we were trapped by a mob of militants yesterday.
They beat me with sticks, some with some whips, some with fists. They beat me. The moment I tried to run away, someone to strip me and I fell down.
Today, Mr. Mason himself was reunited with his family. He managed to escape from his farm only after he too got a beating.
Fine, and I took another clubbing on across the arm and across the chest here.
The Masons fear things could now get worse, and they're sceptical about the new judgment, which says police should evict the farm squatters. Despite today's court ruling, many farmers here fear there will be a new wave of invasions. The next few days are likely to be especially tense, with emotions running high as Zimbabwe prepares to mark the 20th anniversary of independence. Ben Brown, BBC News, Zimbabwe.
Tony Blair has launched Labour's campaign for next month's local elections in England. Speaking at the Open University in Milton Keynes, the Prime Minister said a vote for Labour was a vote for economic competence, a modern NHS, better schools and more help for pensioners. The jury considering a verdict in the case of Kenneth Noy will resume its deliberations tomorrow. Mr. Noy stands accused of murdering a man in a roadside attack just off the M25 4 years ago. He's admitted stabbing the 21-year-old, but he denies murder, saying he acted in self-defence. The Turkish Foreign Minister has written to his British counterpart, Robin Cook, saying he's concerned about the safety of Galatasaray fans travelling to Leeds for next week's UEFA Cup semi-final. The Turkish Football Federation want the return leg to be played at a neutral venue for fear of reprisal attacks after the murder of 2 Leeds fans in Istanbul last week. As Paul Newman reports from Istanbul, there's been a plea for calm from the Galatasaray players.
On the streets of Istanbul this evening, there remains a sense of shock and outrage, a week after the murders of 2 Leeds United supporters. Funeral wreaths adorn the spot in Taksim Square where the men died. There are many messages of condolence, none more appropriate than this. There is still confusion surrounding the violence. Leeds fans claim there was a premeditated attack against them, but eyewitnesses we spoke to also recall fights provoked by some English supporters. Of course it was their fault, said this man. They were the source of the trouble. Plenty of teams from other countries have been here. Why doesn't it happen with them? When Juventus came here, the atmosphere was friendly. They came over here, they drank their beer, and they left very calmly. What I saw that night was chaos. Everyone had a chair in their hands, and the chairs were flying over our heads into the avenue. 2 people came over here and smashed the glass. 5 people have been detained in the forbidding surroundings of Istanbul's high-security prison to await charges relating to the murders. Any trial, though, could be many months away. The UK's senior diplomat here has strongly rejected the perception among some Turkish fans that Leeds supporters brought problems upon themselves by misbehaving.
I don't think that's a fair assessment at all. I don't think that the level of provocation that people have cited in any way can justify the disproportionate response of these senseless killings.
The arguments over who was ultimately responsible for the violence here may never be resolved. But there's little doubt that the tragedy has left its mark on those who should have been enjoying their part in a showpiece European semi-final, the players. Galatasaray invited us to film their training session and allowed the players to make their first comments on the events of last week. There's a reluctant acceptance that they'll travel to Leeds without their fans, if necessary.
Without our support it's no good, but if we have to play, we will play and that's it.
And do you regret what has happened? And
a lot.
Obviously the sympathy is for Leeds and their supporters.
Yes, I regret because two people are killed, you know. That's a murder. They are English, Turkish, Spanish, how I told you before, you know. They have families, they have kids, you know, and I'm very upset.
These are the tickets for the return match, which Galatasaray fans are unlikely to get the chance to buy. Tonight they're locked in the supporters' club safe. The players, though, are preparing for their final league fixture before what will be a highly sensitive visit to Elland Road. Paul Newman, BBC News, in Istanbul.
An elderly cancer patient in Portsmouth says she believes her case proves that the NHS discriminates against people on grounds of age. She was outraged to learn that a hospital doctor she'd not even met had ordered that in an emergency she should not be resuscitated. The charity Age Concern says it's the latest evidence of widespread discrimination in the health service.
Julia Baker and her husband are enjoying their retirement. She's 67 and has made a good recovery since going into hospital last year. But she was shocked to discover that a junior doctor had written on her notes that she was inappropriate for resuscitation if she'd had a heart attack on the ward.
I was appalled, especially as I'd never met the doctor who wrote it and she hadn't met me. How dare she write my life off like that? And I have no say in it.
The charity Age Concern says it's had 6 similar reports in recent months.
We know this goes on, and it really is quite unacceptable. So we want people concerned in the National Health Service, and particularly the medical profession, to make sure that this can't happen.
There are clear guidelines for doctors. Only a senior consultant should rule that a patient should not be resuscitated.
In most wards for the elderly, there will be patients whose medical notes at the foot of their bed say they should not be resuscitated. Now, every hospital has its own code system. Sometimes it's the letters DNR, do not resuscitate. Now, doctors take that decision if they think the patient's too frail or their illness is too far advanced. But in every case, they should consult the patient or their relatives.
Senior doctors say if patients aren't consulted, it's due to poor training, not age discrimination.
Well, I'm not surprised to hear that this is a problem for doctors. I think it's often easy for doctors to say, oh, well, I will make a decision as to what's in the patient's best interest, and perhaps overlook the necessity to share that decision with the patient.
Age Concern wants a national inquiry into discrimination against the elderly in the NHS, which the charity claims is widespread. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
Britain's second largest clothing retailer, Arcadia, is closing hundreds of its stores with the loss of 3,500 jobs. The company is changing direction by shutting all its Principles for Men and Richards shops. Its chief executive said that men don't like shopping and women do. And in future, 80% of its business will be women's wear.
Arcadia has a problem with the rent and a problem with men. Its rent bill on thousands of stores is rising rapidly, and men aren't buying enough of its clothes. So it's closing hundreds of stores, including all its Principles for Men and Richards outlets, and concentrating on selling clothes to women.
Men don't like shopping. Women do like shopping. And we've learned from experience that the women's wear business, therefore, is better for us. And we're changing our business so that 80% of it is going to be women's wear.
Arcadia used to be called the Burton Group, and the Burton suit used to be the best-selling suit in Britain. But now both the name and the fashion have changed. Arcadia will now sell menswear alongside women's clothing in its more successful outlets like Topshop and Dorothy Perkins. But branding experts say Arcadia still has a problem with its image.
They haven't got a clearly defined idea of the future, and brands today, whether it's Goldfish, Orange, Go, all these kind of consumer brands, Egg, these are brands which tell you about the future.
10 years ago, Arcadia's American boss saved what was then the Burton Group from near collapse. But today, fashions have changed, and the high street's an even more ruthless place. Repeating the miracle will be much more difficult. Greg Wood, BBC News.
Doubts are being cast on the benefits of new genetically modified products designed to improve health and prevent diseases. A new report by 2 food campaign groups claims the real beneficiaries of GM crops with altered proteins and vitamins are not consumers but the biotech industry itself. And they say, so far, there's no substantial evidence to support health claims made for the products.
In this laboratory at the UK headquarters of the multinational bioscience company Zeneca, they're working on developing fruit and vegetables they hope will combat Western diseases. The 9 o'clock news has been given exclusive access to film this part of the research. Scientists here are genetically altering tomatoes so they're high in antioxidants, substances that can reduce the risk of certain cancers and heart attacks.
We have a healthy foods program which is actually looking at this link and is trying to establish how we can help improve people's health through the diet, through increasing antioxidants or vitamin levels.
The biotech industry says it's investing millions on improving food quality, for example, removing the allergen from a peanut or engineering a less fattening chip. But today's report questions this. It says it's little more than industry hype and says it's scientists' desperate efforts to reverse failing fortunes. Today's report says GM scientists are overstating the benefits to consumers of their research, and if they develop new GM foods, it's simply for their own profits.
The reality of this second generation of genetically modified crops is that they're going to benefit the food industry, they're going to benefit animal feed processors, and they're going to benefit non-food industrial users rather than offering genuine benefits to consumers.
If a potato could be engineered that's high in starch so it absorbs less fat when frying, there's no doubt that would appeal to consumers and make millions for industry. Scientists say such products could be on the market in 5 years. But today's report warns us not to replace healthy eating with marketing gimmicks. The chairman of the committee that regulates GM or novel foods is convinced that in time the benefits will be widespread.
The process is long and slow, but I make no excuses for that or no apologies, because it's essential that we're absolutely confident in the safety of these foods before they hit the marketplace.
Scientists want a breakthrough to win over the public, but until then, today's report insists a healthy, conventional diet means we don't need GM foods. Nicola Carslaw, BBC News.
And the main news tonight, the UN says there's still time to save the millions facing starvation in Ethiopia. The next news is at 10 o'clock on BBC News 24, but from the 9 o'clock news, good night.
Zimbabwe violence, President Mugabe meets the war veterans behind the land protest. But a court tells their leader, end your occupation of white-owned farms. Philippines air crash investigations begin after 131 people die. Police say they have a new lead in the hunt for Jill Dando's killer. And why you really can be too kind to your pet this Easter.